For decades, WNBA players followed a predictable script when it came to public statements, safe, polished, and filtered through traditional sports journalists who held the keys to fan access. A reporter would ask a question, the player would give a diplomatic answer, and the coverage would go out in neatly packaged stories designed to protect the league's image. Then Sophie Cunningham came along, sat down in front of a microphone on her own podcast, and ripped that entire playbook to shreds. She didn't need a reporter to interpret her thoughts. She didn't need an editor to polish her words. She went straight to the fans, uncut, unscripted, and unafraid of the fallout. And it wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. She spoke with the raw cadence of a teammate venting in the locker room, not the robotic tone of a media-trained athlete. She gave details that traditional coverage would have buried under layers of no comment. And by doing so, she exposed the uncomfortable truth. Fans often want the messy, human side of sports more than the polished corporate version they're fed. In one podcast episode, Sophie completely bypassed the PR machine. No press release, no safe talking points, just her voice, her words, and her platform beamed directly into millions of ears and TikTok feeds. The gatekeepers? Gone. What Sophie did is more than just speak freely, she demonstrated, in real time, that players no longer have to rely on journalists to tell their stories. And for the WNBA's old guard in media, that's terrifying. Because once athletes realize they can own their narrative, the traditional sports press loses its monopoly on information. Sophie's move wasn't just bold, it was revolutionary. And in the world of sports journalism, revolutions are never tidy. If you thought Sophie Cunningham was just going to skirt around sensitive topics, you were dead wrong. This is where things turn from bold to downright incendiary. In one jaw-dropping segment of her podcast, Sophie addressed the departure of DeWanna Bonner, a subject most WNBA insiders have tiptoed around for months. Here's the context. DeWanna Bonner, one of the league's most decorated veterans, left the Phoenix Mercury after years of being both a cornerstone player and a vocal locker room presence. For many, her exit was just business as usual. For Sophie, it was a story that needed to be told without the sugarcoating. Instead of spinning it as a purely professional decision or hiding behind the vague, "we wish her the best" line, Sophie peeled back the curtain. She didn't just say Bonner left, she gave the why. She spoke about the behind-the-scenes friction, the competing visions for the team's future, and how internal dynamics can quietly erode even the strongest player-coach relationships. She described moments where communication broke down, where trust was tested, and where the locker room felt more like a battlefield than a family. She also didn't shy away from the emotional impact. Sophie spoke candidly about what Bonner meant to the Mercury, how she was both a fierce competitor and a personality big enough to shape the team's culture. Losing her wasn't just a roster change, it was a seismic shift in the team's identity. And here's the part that made jaws drop. Sophie implied that the Mercury's leadership knew the rift was growing and chose not to step in. That subtle accusation, wrapped in the authority of someone who lived it, was more explosive than any headline a traditional reporter could have written. By putting her own credibility on the line to say what others wouldn't, Sophie didn't just report the news, she became part of it. The ripple effect was immediate. Fans debated the real reasons behind Bonner's move. Journalists scrambled to verify Sophie's claims, and suddenly, the WNBA's controlled narrative had been cracked wide open. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't rumor. This was a player confirming the whispers everyone in the league had heard, but no one in media had dared to print. And in that moment, Sophie Cunningham cemented herself as the WNBA's most dangerous truth teller. If Sophie Cunningham's first two truth bombs shook the room, her third nearly blew the roof off. She didn't just talk about players, trades, or behind-the-scenes drama. She aimed her fire at the very heart of the WNBA's media machine. And make no mistake, when you go after the league itself, you're not just poking the bear, you're dragging it into the spotlight for everyone to see. Sophie began by pointing out something most fans have felt but few can articulate. The WNBA controls the narrative to such an extreme degree that fans rarely get the real story. Every press release is polished, every interview feels scripted, and controversy is handled with PR-friendly language so vague it could apply to any situation. To Sophie, this isn't just bad journalism, it's bad business. She accused the league of actively creating a sanitized reality where every player is happy, every trade is mutual, and every game is just about the love of basketball. The problem? Fans aren't fools. They know there's tension, egos, and high-stakes politics behind every decision. By pretending everything is fine, Sophie argued, the league is robbing the audience of the drama and authenticity that makes sports compelling. She even compared the WNBA's approach to leagues like the NBA and NFL, where controversy is often allowed to play out in public, sometimes even encouraged because it fuels fan engagement. Fans don't connect to perfection, she said flatly. They connect to people, and people are messy. Then came her most dangerous accusation yet. Sophie claimed that certain players, those considered marketable or safe for the brand, are given more protection and media coverage than others. She described situations where rising stars were shielded from criticism while role players took the full brunt of public blame. She even hinted that some players' off-court behavior had been buried by the league's PR team to maintain a squeaky clean image. It was the kind of comment that instantly made league executives sweat. Because Sophie wasn't some random outsider making noise, she's a player inside the system, with first-hand knowledge of how tightly the WNBA guards its image. And when someone like that says the emperor has no clothes, people start looking a lot closer. The aftermath was immediate. Sports blogs ran with headlines like, "Cunningham exposes WNBA's media bias," and "Is the league protecting its favorites?" Fans flooded comment sections debating who the protected players might be. And while the WNBA stayed silent publicly, insiders whispered that certain PR departments were scrambling to do damage control. Sophie had done the unthinkable. She made fans question whether the league they love is actually showing them the truth or just the version it wants them to see. If you thought Sophie Cunningham was done stirring the pot, think again. Her fourth revelation wasn't about management, wasn't about the media, it was about the players themselves. And this one hit close to home because it peeled back the curtain on something most fans don't want to believe. The WNBA locker room isn't always a sisterhood, it can be a battlefield. Sophie spoke openly about an unspoken divide between veteran players and rookies, a dynamic that's been simmering beneath the surface for years. On the outside, the league promotes unity images of players laughing together at events, hugging after games, posting friendly photos on social media. But Sophie said the reality inside the locker room is far more complex. She described how veterans, especially those with established roles, often view rookies as both a threat and a burden. The threat? Younger players are faster, fresher, and in many cases, much cheaper for teams to keep on payroll. The burden? They demand attention coaching time, media coverage, fan energy, and sometimes, in the eyes of older players, they haven't earned it yet. Sophie recalled instances where rookies were deliberately excluded from veteran-led social gatherings or given the cold shoulder in practice. Not outright bullying, just enough subtle dismissals, cutting remarks, and withheld mentorship to send a clear message. Earn your place before you get our respect. And then she dropped the line that turned heads. Some vets will help you grow. Others will make sure you never take their spot. It was a stark reminder that professional sports aren't just about teamwork, they're about survival. Sophie explained that for veterans, every rookie is a reminder of the ticking clock on their own career. That tension creates an environment where mentorship isn't guaranteed, it's conditional. If a young player shows deference, works quietly, and doesn't seem to be gunning for the spotlight, she might get guidance. But if she's confident, outspoken, and starts attracting media attention, the veteran walls go up. The most explosive part? Sophie hinted that the divide gets worse when a rookie comes in with massive hype, think Caitlin Clark, a Paige Buchers if she enters, or any player who's been heavily marketed before they've even played a game. Those rookies, she said, can face a kind of resentment from vets who've had to grind for years without the same opportunities. Sophie's words sparked a social media storm. Fans debated whether this was competitiveness or pettiness. Some defended the veterans, saying they've earned the right to guard their territory. Others accused them of stifling the next generation out of insecurity. But one thing was clear, Sophie had touched on a truth that's rarely spoken aloud. Behind the smiles and high fives, there's a constant, silent battle for status, respect, and survival. When Sophie Cunningham got to her fifth revelation, the air in the interview room felt heavier, like everyone knew she was about to say something that could ruffle more than a few feathers in the league offices. She leaned forward, locked eyes with the reporter, and said, "The WNBA isn't always a meritocracy. Sometimes, it's about who your coach likes and who they don't." That one sentence pulled the curtain wide open on a reality players have whispered about for years: coaching favoritism. Sophie explained that in professional basketball, talent is just one part of the equation. The rest? Politics, relationships, and the sometimes invisible bonds between players and their coaches. According to Sophie, every coach has their players, those they trust implicitly, lean on during crunch time, and defend even when the stat sheets suggest otherwise. These players get longer leashes. They can miss a few shots, have an off night defensively, or even struggle for a stretch without fear of losing their starting spot. Why? Because the coach believes in them, or, as Sophie hinted, because they've built a personal rapport that goes beyond just basketball. But the flip side is brutal. If a coach decides you're not their type of player, it's an uphill climb every single day. Sophie described seeing teammates deliver outstanding performances in practice, hustling harder than anyone, executing plays perfectly, only to sit on the bench during games while a coach's favorite got minutes, regardless of recent performance. The most gut-wrenching part? Once you're in a coach's bad books, it's almost impossible to get out. Sophie said it can happen for reasons that have nothing to do with skill, personality clashes, style differences, or simply not fitting into the coach's preferred game plan. In some cases, she said, one awkward conversation or a single misunderstood moment can shape a player's role for an entire season. She also touched on how favoritism can subtly shape careers. A player in a coach's inner circle might get more media exposure, leadership opportunities, and on-court trust, which in turn boosts their market value when contract negotiations come up. Meanwhile, equally talented players who are overlooked can find their careers stagnating sometimes, fading out of the league entirely without ever truly getting a chance to prove themselves. Her words sparked immediate debate online. Fans argued over whether this was just the nature of sports or a genuine problem the league needed to address. Former players chimed in, some backing Sophie's claims with their own stories, others defending coaches and pointing out that trust and chemistry are crucial at the professional level. But Sophie stood firm. When people wonder why certain players suddenly break out or why others vanish from the rotation, it's not always about skill. Sometimes, it's about the room you're in, the voice you have, and whether the person holding the clipboard wants you to shine. By the time Sophie dropped her 6th truth bomb, it was clear she wasn't just talking about basketball anymore, she was talking about a machine, a system, one that decides not only who plays, but who matters. She leaned back, let out a short laugh that sounded more like disbelief and said, some players aren't just athletes, they're products. And the league invests in those products, whether or not the numbers back it up. Her point? The WNBA, like any major sports league, isn't just in the business of competition, it's in the business of selling a story. That story needs faces, personalities, and must-watch players who can fill arenas, boost TV ratings, and make sponsors happy. And when the league sees someone with that marketable spark, they'll bend over backwards to make sure that star stays in the spotlight. Sophie explained that this isn't necessarily a conspiracy, it's a strategy. The problem is, it often tilts the competitive balance. If a player is considered the face of the league, they might get more promotional campaigns, softer public criticism, and, most importantly, a longer leash on the court. Struggling through a shooting slump? It's framed as finding their rhythm. Missing defensive assignments? It's written off as saving energy for offense. Meanwhile, equally talented players who maybe aren't as flashy or don't fit the league's marketing mold don't get the same grace. One bad stretch, and suddenly they're on the bench, their contracts in jeopardy. Sophie recalled instances where she's seen marketing decisions indirectly affect basketball decisions, like coaches being nudged to keep certain stars on the floor during nationally televised games, even when it wasn't the best tactical choice. She described the ripple effects this creates in locker rooms. Teammates notice when the rules aren't applied evenly. They see who's untouchable and who's disposable. It can erode trust not just between players and coaches, but between players and the league itself. We're all supposed to be here because we earned it, Sophie said. But sometimes it feels like the scoreboard isn't the only thing determining who wins. Off the court, Sophie pointed out, the machine runs even faster. Promotional appearances, sponsored events, and social media pushes all keep certain names front and center. And while it boosts the league's profile, it can leave others in the shadows struggling for even a fraction of the opportunities their peers get. Fans rarely see the full picture. They just know Player X is everywhere on billboards, commercials, podcasts, and assume it's because they're the best. But Sophie's perspective painted a different reality. Sometimes it's not the stat line that builds a star, it's the storyline. And that's where the silent pressure creeps in. If you're not the league's chosen product, you're constantly aware of the uphill climb. If you are, you feel the weight of staying marketable, even if your game is slipping. Either way, the machine demands you play your role. When Sophie got to this point, her tone shifted. She wasn't talking about marketing or money now, she was talking about something more personal and maybe more dangerous to a player's career. Relationships. Not romantic ones, but the friendships, cliques, and alliances that form within the league's tightly knit circle. People forget, she began. The Vamba isn't that big. It's a small world and everyone knows everyone. That means your reputation isn't just built on your stats, it's built on who you get along with, who you hang out with, and who will go to bat for you when you're not in the room. She painted a picture of a league where social connections can act as an invisible currency. If you're close with a veteran star or a respected locker room leader, doors open both figuratively and literally. That might mean an extra shot at a roster spot, a call from a coach who otherwise wouldn't notice you, or even subtle protection from the harsher side of media criticism. But Sophie also described the flip side. If you cross the wrong person, especially someone with influence, you might find your career path getting rockier. Maybe you get traded unexpectedly. Maybe your minutes shrink without explanation. Maybe that contract offer you thought was coming never materializes. And the reason isn't something that shows up in a stat sheet, it's because you weren't in the right circle. The way Sophie told it, these alliances form naturally shared colleges, off-season training partners, agents who represent multiple players, or simply personalities that click. But once they solidify, they can influence everything from how a team's offense is run to which players get defended in post-game interviews. She recalled seeing on-court dynamics where certain players always looked for each other first, while others were quietly frozen out of key plays. Then there's the role of off-season leagues, overseas teams, and brand sponsorship events, places where friendships deepen and business opportunities get discussed far away from reporters' eyes. Sometimes, Sophie said with a knowing smirk, your real career conversations don't happen in a coach's office, they happen over dinner in Istanbul, or on a beach in Puerto Rico after a charity game. The most surprising part? Sophie insisted this isn't unique to the WNBA, it happens in every tight-knit professional league. The difference is, in a league this small, one strained friendship or one misunderstood comment can have a disproportionate impact on a player's trajectory. And for fans watching at home, none of this is visible. They see chemistry or lack thereof and chalk it up to basketball skill. But Sophie's words made it clear, sometimes it's not about whether you can make the shot. It's about whether anyone wants to pass you the ball in the first place. By the time Sophie got here, the conversation had taken a sharp turn from team chemistry to something far more controversial: how the league handles player health. Fans think injury reports are about transparency, she began, leaning forward like she was about to spill a state secret. They're not. They're about control. She explained that, in theory, injury updates should help fans understand why their favorite players aren't on the court. But in reality, they often become tools for shaping narratives, hiding deeper problems, or keeping opponents in the dark. Some absences are genuine serious sprains, stress fractures, torn ligaments, but others? They fall under a gray area the league would rather not explain. Sophie brought up load management as the perfect example. Officially, it's about protecting players from overuse and avoiding long-term damage. But unofficially, it's a calculated move to preserve star power for big-ticket games, national TV appearances, and playoff runs. If your top player tweaks something in a Tuesday game against a low-drawing team, she said, do you risk making it worse? Or do you bench them so they're ready for the Saturday night ESPN matchup that will actually pull ratings? It's a business decision disguised as a medical one. And while it makes sense from a revenue standpoint, Sophie warned it's not always in the best interest of the athletes. Sometimes, pushing a player through pain for a marquee matchup risks aggravating an injury. Other times, benching them unnecessarily can kill their momentum, disrupt team chemistry, and frustrate the player themselves. What really startled me was when Sophie said, there are also times the league encourages vagueness in injury reports, especially for stars. You'll see knee soreness or ankle discomfort when the truth might be a lot more serious. This isn't just about keeping opponents guessing, it's about keeping sponsors, networks, and fans from panicking. And then she dropped the bombshell. Sometimes the player doesn't even have the final say in whether they play. Trainers, front office execs, and yes, the league itself can overrule them. Because in a league this small, one absence can change ticket sales, viewership, and even merchandise drops. The irony? Fans often think load management is just players being soft or lazy, but Sophie insisted most pros hate sitting out. They're competitors. They want to be out there. But when brand image, revenue forecasts, and playoff positioning collide, health becomes a chess piece in a much larger game. It made me realize when you see that polite, sanitized injury report scroll across the bottom of your TV screen, you're not just getting medical news. You're seeing the outcome of negotiations between athletic trainers, executives, PR teams, and sometimes even marketing directors. The truth? That's often left behind in the locker room. When Sophie shifted to this next point, her tone became razor sharp, almost like she'd been waiting for this topic all along. "You think rookies start their careers on a level playing field?" she asked me. "They don't. The game is tilted before they even step on the court." She explained that before a single rookie gets their first minutes, the league and sometimes even their own team has already slotted them into one of two categories, marketable asset or roster filler, and that label follows them for years. For the chosen ones, the rookies with big college hype, viral highlight reels, or built-in social media followings, everything is different. They get featured in promotional material before they've earned it. They get personal PR teams. They're pushed into endorsement deals, special appearances, and high-profile interviews before they've played 10 professional games. They're given every advantage, Sophie said. Better minutes, more trust from the coaching staff, extra patience when they make mistakes. They're allowed to grow through failure. But then there's the other side, the rookies, without name recognition, without flash, without a sellable story. For them, the leash is incredibly short. They can be just as talented, just as dedicated, but one bad game or one blown assignment, and suddenly they're at the end of the bench, watching their minutes disappear. The cruelest part? Fans rarely notice. The narrative is quietly shaped from the start. When a hyped rookie has a slow start, commentators call it adjusting to the pace of the league, or working through growing pains. But when a no-name rookie struggles, they're labeled not ready for the pros, or a fringe player. Sophie told me about one case she didn't name names where a rookie was deliberately kept out of big televised games, not because they couldn't handle the pressure, but because the league had already decided their marketability was low. If they blow up on national TV, the narrative changes, Sophie said. And that could mess with the marketing plan for the season. She also revealed how some teams manipulate rookie success for contract control. If a player isn't part of your long-term brand vision, you don't necessarily want them putting up breakout numbers right away. It raises their price. So you keep them under wraps, let the public think they're average, and then decide later whether you want to keep them or cut them. The reality is brutal. Before rookies even take the floor, their career trajectory is often being shaped behind the scenes by executives, sponsors, and PR strategists. People who will never dribble a ball in their lives. And if you're thinking this sounds like a conspiracy, Sophie smirked and said, "It's not a conspiracy, it's a business plan." By the time Sophie reached her final point, she leaned back, took a slow sip of her coffee, and let a heavy silence hang in the air like she was about to drop the kind of truth that gets people blacklisted. "You think coaches and GMs run this league?" she said, locking eyes with me. "Sometimes, the real decision makers are sitting 2 lockers down from the water cooler." She wasn't speaking in metaphors. Sophie meant it literally. In certain WNBA teams, star players have more influence over roster decisions than the head coach, or even the general manager. And we're not talking about the casual, who do you like type of conversations. She meant actual decisions that determine careers. Here's how it works, according to her. When a franchise's biggest star is also its biggest revenue driver, management starts treating them not just as an athlete, but as an investment partner. Their comfort, chemistry, and long-term happiness take priority over almost everything else because losing them means losing ticket sales, sponsorships, and TV ratings. That means if a star doesn't get along with a certain teammate, that teammate mysteriously gets traded. If they prefer a certain playing style, roster moves are made to fit that vision. Even free agent signings can be shaped around a star's personal preferences. Sophie told me about a case again. No names where a promising player was on the verge of becoming a starter, but the team's superstar openly voiced they didn't vibe with her energy. Within 2 weeks, she was traded for a role player who barely cracked the rotation. And it's not just about personalities. Stars can influence which veterans stay around, which rookies get minutes, and which coaching strategies survive the season. Some even have direct text message access to the team owner. Sophie laughed when she said, "You'd be shocked how many multi-million-dollar roster decisions have started as a text that began with, 'Yo, we need to talk.'" She pointed out that while this level of influence isn't entirely unique to women's basketball, superstars have always carried weight in pro sports. The smaller market size of the WNBA makes the effect more pronounced. In a league where a single player can be responsible for a massive percentage of merchandise, sales, and media attention, their voice carries a level of power that goes far beyond the court. The risk? It creates a culture where teammates know their fate isn't always in the coach's hands. If you fall out of favor with the locker room's power center, your career in that city is probably over. And everyone knows it, which makes certain locker rooms feel less like a team and more like a political game. Sophie ended with this: "Fans think the drama is on the court. They have no idea that sometimes the real game is happening in private group chats, quiet dinners, and whispered conversations long before tip-off."